All right. So, we always appreciate when you guys point us towards, interesting topics, and you've done it again with this one.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, this is a good one.
this is a fascinating one. And it really kind of revolves around, the big question of just how safe is Vietnam, particularly as it relates to the rest of Southeast Asia.
Yeah.
And we've got a whole, kind of collection of different sources here.
Yeah, a lot of different perspectives.
Everything from, pieces that focus on just Hanoi for solo female travelers. We've got Vietnam in terms of its global safety,
Yeah.
for solo female travelers.
Mhm.
There's even one that just flat out says it's the safest in all of Asia for everybody.
Yeah.
And then we've got one, looking at it through the lens of like, okay, what if you're thinking of retiring there?
Right.
And then there's, kind of a very specific report that says, okay, in Southeast Asia, Vietnam ranks fourth safest.
Mhm.
So, our mission in this deep dive is really to kind of synthesize all these different viewpoints.
Yeah, put the puzzle together.
Yeah, exactly. And figure out, what Vietnam's safety standing in the region really means for you as a listener.
Right, because you might be thinking of going there on vacation or even, a longer term thing, maybe even moving there or retiring there.
Yeah. Are you a digital nomad? Are you, someone who's, looking to travel for a few weeks?
Right.
Just what does it mean when you hear that Vietnam is the fourth safest in Southeast Asia? Like, what does that practically mean?
Yeah, does that mean you should feel comfortable walking around at night? Does it mean you should be careful when you're carrying your valuables? Like,
Exactly. Or, is fourth actually good? Like, what are the top three?
right.
And so on.
Hey, what's the context?
Yeah. So let's jump right into this. And one of the, kind of most recent and most direct pieces of information that you sent us was Numbeo's report from March 2025, which clearly says Vietnam is the fourth safest country in Southeast Asia.
That's right. Yeah. And, it's interesting that, that they put out this report every year.
Yeah.
And it's become kind of a go-to source for a lot of people who are, trying to plan their travel or even, just assess the safety of different countries around the world.
Yeah. And to be clear, they say the top three safest countries in the region are Singapore and then Brunei and then Thailand.
Right.
So Vietnam comes in fourth with a safety index of 59.2 out of 100.
Yeah. So that's, it's more than halfway there.
Yeah.
But, it's not quite as high as some of the other countries in the region.
Yeah. I mean, are we splitting hairs here? Like, what does that 59.2 actually even mean?
Yeah. So it's important to understand what goes into that number. Numbeo, they gather data on people's perceptions of safety. Do they feel safe walking around during the day? Do they feel safe walking around at night? And they also look at reported incidents of crime. And that can range from, petty theft all the way up to, more serious offenses like assault and robbery.
So, that 59.2 suggests that, generally speaking, people feel pretty secure in Vietnam.
Yeah.
It'd be really interesting, though, to kind of compare that to other countries in the same part of the world.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a good point. Like, how does Vietnam stack up against its neighbors?
Right.
And the same Numbeo report actually indicates that a number of Vietnam's neighbors, like the Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, and Cambodia, all have lower safety indices. So that means that, based on Numbeo's data and their methodology, Vietnam is actually perceived as a safer country than these others within Southeast Asia.
Okay, so that gives us a concrete starting point. We've got fourth safest, according to one, pretty major index. We've also got other sources that paint a potentially even brighter picture.
Right.
I'm thinking of Travel Off Path specifically. In January 2024, they went as far as to say that Vietnam was the safest country to visit in Asia for the entire year.
Yeah, I saw that one. And that was a pretty bold statement.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. I think they really emphasized Vietnam's political stability
Right.
as a big factor, especially when you consider, what's happening in other parts of the world. There are a lot of places that are experiencing a lot of unrest right now.
Right.
And they specifically cited something called the Global Law and Order Index.
Okay.
Which actually ranked Vietnam as the most peaceful state in Asia.
Wow.
And get this, 7th in the entire world.
7th worldwide.
Yeah.
That's incredible. I mean, that really does put things in perspective.
Yeah.
And it kind of, it highlights how that underlying political stability, like, probably creates an environment where law and order is just, maintained better.
Yeah.
And that leads to lower crime rates and a greater sense of security, I guess, for everyone. Not just travelers, but
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, it's not just about feeling safe from crime, but it's also about feeling safe from, political upheaval or civil unrest.
right, exactly.
And I think that's something that Vietnam really has going for it right now.
It makes you wonder, what specific aspects of that stability are most impactful.
Right. Is it something about the government? Is it something about the culture? Is it, what is it about Vietnam that makes it so stable?
Yeah, it's the people.
I think that's something that would be interesting to dig into further.
Yeah, so while Numbeo is giving us this regional ranking based on, perceived safety and reported crime, this Global Law and Order Index seems to be looking at this much broader picture.
Right, more holistic view.
Yeah, of peace and stability. And in that regard, Vietnam really excels on a global scale.
Yeah, for sure.
Then we've also got Time Out magazine from April 2024, and they offer another angle. They're focusing specifically on the safety of solo female travelers.
Yeah, that's an important one because, solo female travel is becoming increasingly popular.
Yeah.
But it's also, unfortunately, there are still safety concerns that women have to think about that men don't necessarily have to.
Absolutely.
And Time Out, they listed Vietnam as one of the 9 safest destinations in the world for women traveling alone.
Wow.
And it was the only Southeast Asian country to make that global list.
That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, they even said that it's a good alternative to Thailand.
Oh, interesting.
Which, Thailand is often seen as kind of the go-to place for solo female travelers in the region.
Right.
But they said that Vietnam is a good option too, and it's maybe even a little less crowded.
Okay.
And they specifically highlighted Ho Chi Minh City and Hanoi as being particularly safe.
Yeah, and their reasoning seemed to align with what we've heard so far. Political stability, low rates of violent crime, specifically called out those major cities as being safe for international visitors. So it seems like a sense of security. It's not just a general feeling.
Right. Yeah.
It's backed up by, these assessments that are focusing on specific demographics.
Exactly. I mean, they're really looking at, the needs and concerns of solo female travelers.
Right.
And saying that, Vietnam is a place where they can feel safe and comfortable.
Right. And it becomes even more real when we look at specific places within Vietnam that are highlighted for their safety. Tripzilla in March 2023 specifically called out Hanoi.
Oh, yeah.
As one of the 8 safest Asian destinations for solo female travelers.
I like Hanoi. It's a great city.
Yeah.
There's so much to see and do there.
And they have this really reassuring quote, 2, violent crimes against tourists are rare and most locals are friendly.
Yeah, that's so important.
Yeah, that personal element of feeling welcome and safe in your interactions, that can be huge, especially when you're traveling alone.
Right, especially if you're a woman and you're traveling alone, you want to feel like you can trust the people around you.
Right.
And that you're not going to be harassed or, worse.
Yeah, it really suggests that, Hanoi, it might not always be top of mind for solo female travel.
Right.
But it sounds like it offers this genuine sense of security.
Yeah. And it's a beautiful city, too.
Yeah.
I mean, the architecture is amazing. The food is fantastic.
Absolutely.
It's definitely worth a visit.
And Travel Off Path also highlighted the safety and the charm of Hoi An.
Oh, yeah.
They were talking about its, charming yellow-washed streets as a place where you can just wander without feeling unsafe.
Yeah, Hoi An is such a special place. It's like stepping back in time.
Yeah, they're talking about how you can, connect that to its historical significance and the beautiful architecture. And it really does paint a picture of a secure and pleasant place to explore.
Yeah, and it's also a very walkable city. You can just wander around and get lost in the little streets and alleys.
Yeah, and they also mentioned Hue and Da Nang as, other locations where travelers can generally feel safe.
Right.
Which suggests this kind of broader trend of safety across, different parts of the country.
Yeah, it seems like Vietnam as a whole is a pretty safe place to travel.
So whether you're, in this bustling urban center or you're exploring some historic town, these reports are all suggesting this pretty consistent level of safety for travelers in Vietnam.
Right. And I think that's really appealing to a lot of people.
Yeah.
Especially, in today's world where there's so much uncertainty.
And we've talked about general tourists and solo female travelers, but one of the sources you sent also looked at safety through this very specific lens of retirement.
Oh, yeah, that's an interesting one.
Go Banking Rates in July 2023, they ranked Vietnam as the 4th safest place to retire in Asia
Okay.
for those looking to live on under $2,000 a month.
So for people who are looking for, affordability as well as safety.
Right, exactly.
And their methodology was really interesting. They considered a lot of different factors like data from the UN economic indicators, cost of living data from Numbeo, and that global peace index again,
Right.
with this kind of threshold for peace under 2.0.
Yeah, and Vietnam met that threshold with a global peace index ranking of 1.786.
Okay, so they're well under the threshold.
Yeah, it's amazing how consistently that peace index comes up across these different types of safety assessments.
Right. It really does speak to the importance of peace and stability.
Yeah, as a foundation for creating a safe environment.
Yeah.
And Go banking rates, they also pointed to Vietnam's relatively low cost of living
Right.
as a significant draw for retirees,
Yeah.
especially when you combine that with that level of peace and safety.
Right. I mean, it's a very attractive combination.
Yeah, it's kind of, having your cake and eating it too.
Exactly.
But it's worth noting that in this specific ranking for retirees, Malaysia, Kuwait, and Mongolia, they were ranked slightly higher.
Oh, interesting.
So that suggests that, maybe the specific criteria for safe retirement might include, additional factors beyond just having low crime rates.
Right. Maybe things like access to healthcare or, the quality of the infrastructure.
Yeah.
Things like that.
That makes sense. A retiree, they might prioritize different aspects of safety and security
Right.
compared to, younger solo traveler.
Yeah, like maybe a retiree is more concerned about, having a stable political environment.
Right.
Whereas a younger traveler might be more concerned about, petty crime or street harassment.
Yeah, absolutely. So as we kind of look at all these different reports,
Mm-hmm.
From Numbeo's regional ranking to, this global recognition for solo female travelers and its appeal for retirees,
Right.
what are the key threads that seem to explain Vietnam's, generally positive safety reputation?
Well, I think there are a few things that stand out. First of all, political stability is a recurring theme.
Mm-hmm.
Both Time Out and Travel Off Path mentioned it as a significant contributor.
Right.
And then, of course, there's the low crime rates.
Yeah.
Time Out specifically highlighted the low rates of violent crime.
Mm-hmm.
And the overall low crime rates are kind of implied by Travel Off Path's assessment and Numbeo's methodology. And then Numbeo also directly measures the public perception of safety.
Yeah.
And the results seem to indicate that people generally feel secure in Vietnam, both during the day and at night.
That's great.
Yeah. And then finally, there's that human element that Tripzilla mentioned, the friendliness of the locals,
Right.
that can really make a difference in how safe you feel in a place.
Absolutely.
And then, while Numbeo ranked Singapore as the safest country in Southeast Asia,
Right.
and that's often attributed to its very strict laws, it's reasonable to assume that, a strong legal framework in Vietnam also plays a role in maintaining order and contributing to safety.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds like it's this really interesting combination of systemic factors,
Mm-hmm.
the political environment, law enforcement, and then those more community-driven aspects,
Right.
like how locals interact with visitors that contributes to this overall perception of safety.
Yeah, it's a multifaceted thing.
And this has got to play a role in Vietnam's, growing appeal as a tourist destination.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, people want to go to places where they feel safe and comfortable.
Right.
And Vietnam seems to be checking all those boxes.
Yeah. The very report that placed Vietnam as fourth safest in Southeast Asia
Mm-hmm.
also noted that, the country welcomed 17.6 million international visitors last year.
Wow.
And they're approaching, pre-pandemic numbers, and they're aiming for 22 to 23 million visitors this year.
So tourism is booming in Vietnam.
Yeah. And it seems very likely that Vietnam's reputation for safety is a big part of attracting those numbers.
Yeah, for sure.
So to kind of sum up our deep dive today, it seems like Vietnam generally holds this really strong reputation for safety within Southeast Asia. And while Numbeo's latest report places it as the fourth safest in the region,
Right.
Numerous other sources offer these even more positive assessments, highlighting, its political stability, the low crime rates, the positive public perception of safety, and particularly its safety for solo female travelers.
Yeah, it's a great destination for solo female travelers.
Yeah, and it's important to remember that these rankings can vary,
Yeah.
based on the specific criteria
Right.
and the group being considered.
Mm-hmm.
However, the overall picture from these diverse sources,
Yeah.
it paints Vietnam as a country where safety is this really, notable and positive characteristic.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment.
So considering Vietnam's ranking as the fourth safest country in Southeast Asia, and its broader recognition as a safe place to visit and even retire, by all these different international sources,
Right.
we have to ask you, what specific aspects of safety are most important to you?
Yeah.
When you're evaluating a new place to travel to or potentially call home.
Right.
And how do these different reports with their own focus and methodology, how do they help you weigh those priorities as you consider your next adventure?
Yeah, it's definitely something to think about.
It is something to ponder. Thanks for exploring this with us on The Deep Dive.
Thanks for having me.
See you next time.